Der Australier Sam Voutas ist in China aufgewachsen und dreht dort immer noch mit großem Vergnügen Komödien. Sein neuester Film heißt The King of Peking, ein Film über die große nostalgische Liebe zum Kino, ganz wie das große Vorbild Cinema Paradiso. Mit einem Unterschied. Sein Hauptprotagonist ist ein Mann, der auch Vater ist und in großen Nöten und der diese Liebe zum Kino umwandeln muss in Bootleg-Kopien, um die nötigen Gelder heranzuschaffen, damit er seinen Sohn behalten darf.
Big Wong scheint mit dem Job als Hausmeister in einem Kino endlich alles richtig gemacht zu haben. Doch als seine Ex-Frau Unterhaltszahlungen für seinen Sohn Little Wong von ihm verlangt, wird es finanziell eng. Damit Vater und Sohn nicht getrennt werden, tut Big Wong in seinen Augen das einzig Richtige, riskiert damit aber trotzdem, seinen Sohn zu verlieren. Der kriminelle Nebenverdienst lässt wieder hoffen, bringt aber die Frage mit sich, was es eigentlich heißt, ein Vorbild für den eigenen Sohn zu sein. Dies muss Big Wong noch herausfinden.
Hey, 胶片的1/4。哎，这事儿不能让你妈知道啊！
为什么？您不是说答应了吗？
是答应了。
那为啥不能让她知道？
我这不是想给她一惊喜吗？
我妈不喜欢惊喜。
所以说啊，干脆就甭让她知道。
Alles hat seinen Preis, auch wenn dies erst nicht so scheint. Dies erzählt der Film King of Peking auf eine komische und gleichzeitig sehr einfühlsame Weise. In den langen Bildern kann der Zuschauer den Blicken der Figuren ungehindert folgen und findet sich zwischen der Magie des klassischen Kinos und der grauen Wirklichkeit von Vater und Sohn wieder. Auf wessen Seite man steht, muss dann jeder für sich selbst entscheiden.
Sam, it's a rather weird thing that an Australian man would make movies in China in Chinese. How did that happen?
It all started when my parents moved to China in the 1980s. They brought me along, and so I was raised in this culture that was very different than my own back in Australia. And then the 1990s, I also was there and basically finished high school there. So as a result, you know, my upbringing was very different from, say, you know, my cousins back home. They knew Australian football, and I knew, you know, what was happening in Beijing. So that's sort of very much changed the direction as a filmmaker that I've taken in my career, just because a lot of my movies are based on my experiences.
Now, making movies in China, the first thing that pops up in everybody's mind is the very rigid system that a film has to go through in terms of censorship. How is that with your movies?
So the last two movies that I've made, Red Light Revolution and King of Peking, from the outset, we've always wanted to only release on the internet. So while if you want to have a theatrical release in China, the censorship process is quite strict. You start even at not even just script stage, just you know, you write an introduction to the movie, 1 page, and that's when the process starts. But with internet, it's less rigid. You still do have to go through a process, but often it's after you've filmed. So we've just found that's been a system that's worked better for us, working with you know, smaller budgets. But in China too, so many people now are just watching their movies on the internet. So that's it doesn't mean that we're not finding an audience. It seems like increasingly the audience is online.
You also crowdfunded that movie, which is kind of. I find it kind of ironic because you're crowdfunding this movie and at the same time your protagonist does bootleg copying of movies, which basically is one way of killing the entire system. Tell me something about that.
Yeah, sure. So we realized that a lot of the people who liked our last film, people who'd seen Red Light Revolution in China, they couldn't support our crowdfunding campaign in the West because of what's called the Great Firewall of China. There's basically this censorship wall that blocks access to certain websites. So we wanted people to be able to, you know, give $10, $2 to our campaign, but they couldn't access it. So we decided to run 2 different campaigns. So we had one in English on a Kickstarter, and then immediately afterwards we had one in Chinese on a Chinese site that accepted Chinese credit cards. And we basically just did it that way. We tried to deal with it like a co-production, a traditional co-production between 2 countries, only it was a crowdfunding co-production.
That is quite interesting. That's the best way to do it, actually, yeah.
It was the only way to do it because it's the internet, the Great Firewall of China has created almost two separate internets, 2 separate worlds. So you have to jump into both separately, like traveling to the moon.
But there's like another world, there's this big cultural gap between the East and the West. How can you manage to, with films, and especially the films you're making, to kind of eliminate that?
Yeah, no, it's something that at first I was always very uncomfortable with, that sort of sense of not really fitting in anywhere, you know, like back when I'm in Australia, I'm not fully, my background is still so different from so many of other Australians, and then in China also not really fitting in 100%. And there's a phrase that's I used to reject, which is called third culture kid, which means, you know, kid who's grown up in a culture other than themselves. And I've started to embrace that phrase more, because I think even though it does, you know, not being from a place has its negatives, one positive that it gives you is that you can stand in 2 places, and it enables you to see 2 different perspectives a little bit. And I hope so anyway. So I try to bring that to my work, to try to be able to see things from more than just one perspective. Hopefully it works.
The film deals with this incredible love for cinema, and your main protagonist is a big lover of cinema in all kinds of ways, but especially Western cinema. Yes. Is that a common thing in China?
Oh, absolutely. No, it's a very common thing. The majority of box office receipts are for overseas movies. And this film is set in a time when access to Hollywood or Western, even German movies, was quite limited. So you have, for people who loved cinema, they really did love cinema passionately, and they were very keen to try to get their hands on movies from that era.
It does remind me of the great classic Cinema Paradiso, of course. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely moments in there where I'm like, yes, I know what you're doing. So that obviously bears the question, what are your most influential films? What are the films in cinema's history that really had an impact on you?
As an independent filmmaker, one of the films that really influenced me the most was El Mariachi by Robert Rodriguez, which is a movie that was made for a couple of $1,000s. Yeah. And the reason that really just changed my career is for the first time, I was at university at the time, and I realized, I was studying theatre, and I realized, hold on, I can make a movie without a big budget. You know, I can tell a story with perhaps just a bunch of my friends and a small camera. And it gave me the courage to go off and do that. And in regards to this film, the biggest influence, I'd say, would probably be The Bicycle Thief, which is a story about a father and a son, and also about stealing.
And it's a neo-realistic story. Is that also an influence on this film?
Yeah, no, it's Italian neo-realism. And myself and the cinematographer, while we were in pre-production, we were watching different Italian neo-realist films and trying to see the compositions, how the dolly operates, the way that they, you know, how close it is, to try to emulate, in a way, in some scenes, some of their filming techniques. Because this movie is about cinema, we wanted to feel like the movie was from a different time, like you'd opened up a vault, an old cinema vault, and found it, and so you're like, is this film from the 1990s or is it older? That was the goal, to make it not just a movie that was a period piece, but to make it feel like it was the piece itself is a period piece. It's from another period altogether. And to incorporate like the nostalgia. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
And that went even to colour correction. So when we were doing the colour correction, we had an advisor at the colouring house who was showing us movies from the 90s in China and showing some imperfections with the colour, the way that the blacks were more washed out, and trying to emulate that so that when we play the movie, it's sort of, even if subconsciously, it sort of seems reminiscent.
Thank you so much for this interview, Sam.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me.